Marxism and Dark Souls. So before I get started, I have to turn down the volume. I have to turn down the volume and everything because I cannot really handle it. This is awkward. I don't really like doing this because it makes me sound. So, I would like to talk about Marxism. Um, it's mainly going to be about. I should have named this. I don't really know any other word to say. Talk about Marxism, and but generally, I should have said this. A Marxist in Dark Souls, but anyway, I rename it after the live stream. So I wanted to talk primarily about Iran, and I wanted to talk about uh, countries like Iran, um, and really get into.
Did you ring the second bell?
I really want to talk about. Hold on. I wanted to talk about Iran, and I wanted to talk about imperialism. So this is going to be a bit of Marxism, but mixed in with current events. Let's get started. Um, I wanted to talk about Iran and North Korea and countries like that because the United States is beginning to ramp up its imperialistic machine. Um, it gets closer to its financial collapse. I have a lot of thoughts about that, and when I say one thing, a thousand things pop into my brain. So it's very difficult for me to stay on exactly one topic. But I'm gonna really try because I want to explain to you why what's happening with Iran is extremely dangerous. So the history of Iran and the nuclear deal and what is going on goes back all the way with Obama when he made a peace deal with Iran, which would halt any nuclear production, and they would allow them to have nuclear power, but they would require inspections. And there has been literally thousands of reports, and even from the EU, saying that they have, in fact, been following uh, what was expected of them. what was expected of them in the Iran deal. Um, and then you have someone like Trump who comes in and shreds the Iran deal, and we were pulled out immediately. And let me explain to you why that's a bad thing. Iran now can, because of the United States pulling out of the Iran deal, allows uh, Iran to develop nuclear weapons. It allows this nation, it allows our nation, it allows Iran to uh, develop nuclear weapons. Uh, to develop nuclear weapons and allow to develop nuclear weapons, which is, in my view, not a bad thing. I think countries like Cuba and countries that are at risk of U.S. aggression should have nuclear weapons. Allow them to have the advantage of MAD, which is mutually assured destruction. Um, but they cannot uh, benefit from MAD if they do not have a nuclear weapon. And that's why whenever you get a country getting a nuclear weapon program that it is that does not work with the United States, there's a huge deal. There was not a huge deal when when there was not a huge deal when Israel got nuclear weapons. In fact, it was praised. Um, but when China got, but when North Korea started to develop their nuclear weapon program, there was a huge fucking shitstorm over this and over the fact they were able to develop a nuclear arsenal. This is absolutely is counterproductive. I mean, this is um, imperialism in action. So we need to really talk about why the United States is um, so desperate to get in a new war. For capitalism to exist, it requires imperialism. It requires constant, uh, constant exploitation of the worker. And when that is not enough, because inevitably it won't be enough, because this is how capitalism exists. Capitalism is a never-ending vampire that requires is a vampire which has a thirst which cannot be quenched, and we see this in the United States that they're constantly going after another. They're constantly um, going on a tirade against against other countries to start a war because they need a war. They need a war to exist. Okay, where's my knife? They need a war to exist. They need war. They need constant imperialism. They want to take over Iran so they can rob it of its um, minerals and then fuel the military industrial complex, thus keeping their economy and their wealth uh, from collapsing. And the United States is an oligarchy of the bourgeoisie. We live underneath the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. And to explain to you imperialism, you have to understand capitalism, and you have to explain different parts of imperialism because it's very easy to get misled that imperialism is it's this and this when it's not. Um, Vladimir Lenin wrote several um, writings about imperialism. It was a huge part of his um, addition to the mass line, and one of them was capitalism, the highest imperialism, the highest stage. Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. And in this, he argues basically what I have been telling you. He explains he explains multiple times how capitalism cannot exist without constant exploitation. Rather than exploiting the worker, they exploit foreign countries for their minerals. I've been sitting here for like an hour trying to figure out what I'm doing. Capitalism requires constant exploitation. And when they run out of people to exploit and people to profit off of their misery, you begin having imperialism. That imperialism is capital automatic go to. And that it would have colonial imperialism both exist at the same time. We have Democrats who support imperialism. These are what Stalin would call social fascists. People who do not support fascism outright, but they are perfectly okay with stuff like imperialism, and they're okay with wars because we have to talk about what imperialism looks like on the ground. It's fascism. It's fascism in another country. Do you think that countries in South America who have literally been suffering underneath the rule of an imperialistic country with U.S. sanctions, and then you had Pikachu, who was installed in Brazil by the CIA, by the United States government, and recently the per, with the with the election of President Bolsonaro, with the president of Brazil. I'm sorry, in the middle of this, I was called a fascist on someone just. Hmm, that was weird. Huh. I'm sorry, I had to completely stop because that threw me off guard. Um, where was I? Yeah. explaining explaining imperialism itself. America. So oh fucking hell. Um, Underneath Picachillo's rule, we can automatically see imperialism within this. Ugh. Um, I'm gonna try to finish this, but I can't. I physically can't. After getting that message, um, after receiving the message, fuck off, fascist. Um, it really threw me off guard because I'm not really that sensitive, but it's just like, uh, uh, okay, that was weird. um, but let's talk about that. Let's talk about how the far right calls anti-fascist fascist. This is something that I've been seeing a lot, and I get a lot of messages telling me to fuck off, to die, to go to hell, to just very, 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 very unseemly uh, beliefs towards me. Sayings, not beliefs, just very, uh, just very bewildering. And I want to explain. I'm about to face a bit of chaos. Not looking forward to it. Okay, back to where I was. I think I can get back to imperialism and why in Brazil. Brazil is a perfect example of American imperialism and its cost. Um, Fascist dictators are always elected after you have a fascist um, coup, after you have a fascist, after you have an imperialistic war. Um, as as an imperial war in Picachillo and the CIA's interference within these things. Um, but imperialism, like colonialism, is uh, I'm just completely off guard. I was doing so well, and then just, whew. Uh, let let's move on, um, because I can explain to you imperialism, but I want to more talk about fascism, and I want to more talk about what just is not being said. You're not going to hear a lot of people sit here and say that there is um, that we now have an imperial, that we now have a concentration camps at the border. And people who said using the same excuse they use with Israel and say that's very insensitive to Jewish people. And let me explain to you why this is bullshit. Um, what's going on at the border is despicable. You have people in cages that don't even that haven't been able to see their family, who haven't are completely locked up in cages for absolutely no reason. For absolutely no reason than being brown. We have seen that Donald Trump has, within his past, said horrifically racist stuff about immigrants. He also he also has pardoned these horrific murderers who have killed and slaughtered um, hundreds of people. And it is truly a disgusting thing um, to see people defending this. These are concentration camps. These are meant to concentrate these people. And this is the beginning. We're not in the beginning of genocide. Sitting here and say this is how genocide starts. It's well meant, but it's historically inaccurate. We're right in the middle. The killings are only a couple months away for when they begin killing. And I am heavily, very much so concerned with what they call the ice buck, with the claims of sexual harassment, with the claims of torture, and with this thing which has killed multiple people, called the ice box, where they basically keep people in very, 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 very cold spaces, which causes them to freeze. And they've been using this as a way to destroy their morale. Um, um, if you cannot see the fact that we are in the middle, that if you cannot see and refuse to see the huge fact that we are preparing for mass murder, you have nothing more than to look back at the history of this stuff. Look back in your textbook. I want you to. It didn't start with killing people. Yeah, and we've gotten to that point. It started with hate. It started the moment Donald Trump took the office of the presidency. The moment Donald Trump became president was the moment where we the moment Donald Trump started his campaign was the beginning of his genocide. We never use the word genocide when we talk about Donald Trump, when we talk about this crisis. And I think it's incredibly important to call something out for what it is. I have been a proponent since I was 14, since I was 12 years old, that history should never be sugarcoated. When you have a historical event, you show it in its blatant, ugly, horrific details. And if you've studied the Holocaust, and if you've studied what happened, you know exactly what Donald Trump did. He started with his dog whistles. He started blaming people the first day of his campaign, calling these people, these innocent people, and calling these innocent people, um, who were completely innocent, uh, calling these completely innocent people rapists and drug dealers and killers, and that they would steal our job and that they would kill everyone. We started out with that, and then we horrifically ended up here. We ended up, and then in 2017, he continued that. He did the Muslim ban, and then he banned people from certain countries from South America from entering the United States. This thus beginning our long thus beginning the long thus keeping up with the long process of genocide. You gotta give me a moment. Thus beginning the long process that it takes to thus continuing his path towards thus beginning his long path towards beginning the genocide of the immigrants. Why do you think people are so um, hesitant to call what's going on in the border for what it is? Because they're so scared of challenging the establishment that they are perfectly okay with letting a genocide happen. And this is something that we need to challenge. And I think I'm done with this live stream. It's 27 minutes. My last one was 40 minutes. But I have another live stream that I need to attest to that's going to address this very issue on Facebook. So I'm going to stop this and go ahead and move over to Facebook.